Welcome back, everyone, to episode 13 of the Unclassified podcast with Preston Stewart Ben Wheeler. We have a lot to talk about today, but remember to like, comment, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. It helps boost the podcast. But more importantly, the biggest question of the week, Preston, has this been the longest week in all of human history? I mean, it feels like I've lived decades in this week.
It has been exhausting. Yeah, it's hard to figure out what to do because so much stuff happens day in and day out. And even if you're trying to focus on like the international response and foreign affairs and all that stuff, we're watching world leaders kind of like they're in a panic trying to figure out like how to respond to it. Ben, since we talked last, we started and ended a trade war with Canada and Mexico. That happened since we did our last episode. Yeah. Like I was starting to put together kind of a tongue-in-cheek series about the North American War of 2025, because like immediately everybody was there were so many people online that like decided they hated Canada now, and the Canadians got super pissed, understandably so. And I was going to make a whole kind of joking series about it, like I can't believe we're actually here. And before I could even get that script in outline, it was over, and we're good to go now. We're all back on the same team. So yeah, that was like a matter of 24 hours.
Right? There's no timeline anymore, and things just expire randomly. It's like living in hell, kind of. It's just chaos constantly, which is good for our business, right? But for the sanctity of everyone else, probably not. Although I reckon maybe a lot of people don't have to watch the news because they don't report on the news, so it's really only us who have to suffer.
Yeah, like on the one hand, if you're commentating about this kind of stuff, it's a lot to talk about, but let me bring up the downside of that too. Like, I have had countless videos in the last few weeks where I've started to make something, and then in the span of like 30 minutes, the entire story changes. And that's not normal. So like, I had a friend who made a video. I got it out just in the right sweet spot and approached it, I guess, in a way to where it's still standing, but talking about Trump taking over Gaza. I had a good friend who made a whole video about how, no, there's actually not going to be troops on the ground. And then before he could hit publish, we had like Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Rubio saying, well, maybe it could be a thing. And then a big part of his video was like, that's not actually what Trump meant. And then again, before he could hit publish, Trump came out and said, no, that's exactly what I meant. Like I thought about it for a long time and that's it. So it's like, it's this weird mix of there is a ton happening, but you know, if you shut off for 30 minutes to put something out there, it could be outdated by the time you hit publish.
Well, and also don't forget the fake out too. So another aspect of this era is that like the main show of the company I work for, they were very late to the Gaza story, right? And the White House had walked it all back. This is not going to happen. No troops, yada, yada, yada. Right, and so the show flops. The next day, he's on True Social, like you said, with Hegseth and Rubio, and they're all saying, yeah, we'll deploy troops. We're going to go ahead and do it, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, dog, what do you just fake this out? Like, what the hell? So it is a constant saga. If you're either late, you're getting faked, who knows? But we're, just to start it light, do you want to go to Colombia with me soon? Because they're looking to legalize cocaine, and the president says it's no different than whiskey, which that's some pretty strong whiskey.
What was it? He said something like the only reason cocaine is outlawed is because it's made in Latin America or something like that?
Yes, he did say that.
That's quite the take. I like that. I don't know. It's outside the box.
You know, I like world leaders who just go out there and they just say things. It rules. And I like when they have their own pet theories and conspiracy theories. I think that's awesome. But Preston, pick a continent. I mean, we have something on every single continent this time around.
All right, let's start with Israel. Israel, Gaza, Middle East. I feel like this is a good place to start. We'll see where we sit today. So Netanyahu, first world leader, the prime minister of Israel, first world leader to visit Trump since he's taken office, and it was a big scene. There was, we've talked about it here. The Trump cabinet picks have largely been like the most pro-Israel cabinet, arguably in history. Trump has pretty much been signaling from the start that he either is just going to let Israel do whatever they want or doesn't care at all, which has been interesting to see how people have kind of reacted to that now that it's actually playing out. because like the writing was on the wall. Anybody that I'm kind of in a little bit of shock of the folks that had in their mind that Trump would be like good for the Palestinian people or better than Biden. Like, I don't know where that came from. Like they might not have liked what Biden was doing, but I feel like looking at Trump and thinking that he was going to be like, you know, the savior of the Palestinian cause. I don't think there is, I can't understand at all where that was pulled. But anyways, Netanyahu came, they had a little sit down, and it was like a major story in their little photo op, because Trump just kind of casually said, you know, I don't think that the Palestinians should go back to Gaza. We'll get them out of there, and all of them, and they may never want to come back, ever. Which is, like, listen, that is describing ethnic cleansing, right? Like, taking a group of people and just straight up moving them somewhere else and saying you can't come back. That would have been a huge story, and like the story of the month, if not more. But like 20 minutes later, he dropped we're going to own Gaza, we're going to take it over and make it into a beautiful place. And it kind of looked like
the Middle East.
Yeah, it kind of looked like nobody saw that coming. Like there's some videos of Netanyahu's face kind of changing when that comes out with like a what? Which is hilarious. Yes. Like they were just together. They had in private meetings, and it looks like Netanyahu did not know this was coming. There's a video of Susie Wilds, his chief of staff, Trump's chief of staff, in the background during one of the statements, and you can see her like visibly confused. Seen Rubio interviewed a couple days later. You can see he's like, he clearly had no idea.
The best part about it is that someone told me he was riffing, and I was like, he's not riffing. He's reading from prepared remarks right now. So someone wrote this, either he did or someone wrote this out for him, and he's reading it.
And he even made that statement. He said, this isn't something I thought of lightly. This is something we've thought about for a long time and put a lot of consideration into. The response here has been interesting because, as with everything Trump, you've got people saying, well, that's not what he means. And you say, well, what does he mean? And the response is, we have no idea. But it's not that.
They love to do that.
It's wild. You've got, generally speaking, every world leader, with the exception of Israel, came out. Every world leader or country that said anything about it, all said, that ain't good. We're not on board.
The Israeli United Nations minister said that he doesn't think the Palestinians should be moved out of Gaza. That they're not about it. That's what they told the UN, yeah.
It definitely, like, points for creativity, kind of, I'll say that. But also the idea of moving the Palestinian people out of Gaza forever has, like, that's kind of like the oldest of the old plans. It's not, like, that one's been on the table for a long time. It's just that, you know, when it's brought up, people immediately end up in the ethnic cleansing conversation because you have to forcibly displace people. So, like, it's not really new in that sense. I guess the new part would be rebuilding it in a way to where they want to come back at some point. It's very confusing at this point. But either way, it sounds like there is the possibility of U.S. troops going. They haven't ruled that out. And they also, again, it's been all over the map. We at one point heard that really all this is Middle Eastern countries are going to step up for the reconstruction. They all have said, what? Or what? And there wouldn't be troops.
It really, like the whole thing, he kept saying, well, why would you want to go there? You keep doing the same thing over and over again. You attack Israel and they bomb you and they got to rebuild. Like, why do you want to keep going back? And Matthew Iglesias said something like this, where he just said, people who are in business and in tech, they don't quite understand political ideologies. They think it's all fake, you know? Or not even like political ideology, just like political conflicts in general. And they think it's all fake. And I think like Trump's comments kind of personified that, right? Where it's just like, why would you want to keep going back? And it's like I get where you're coming from, but like you're missing the very key context there, right? But what a crazy suggestion. He did keep saying that Egypt and Jordan were going to take the Palestinians, and they keep saying no. Yeah. They released statements saying no. But he says that he thinks they're going to do it for him. And then he called President Sisi general. Is he a general? Maybe he is. I think he was at one point, right? or maybe he's
sure.
mixing him up with someone. But yes, that's
the couple. Yeah, so there's a couple key hiccups here that if we can, I think it was Josh Hawley, a Republican senator. The best part of all of this is watching people defend things where it's like clearly they don't want to have to defend this. I think that's hilarious. And
hysterical.
yeah, it's really funny. No matter which direction it comes from, I think that is hilarious. And Hawley said, I think it was Hawley, but he said something like, "Well, I don't think it's a good idea, but we'll have to wait and see how it plays out." Like, let's get this war started, and then we'll make a decision on if we think the war is a good idea. So, like, but either way, there's a couple. If we can look past all of that, there's a couple big hiccups here that, I don't know if I'm overthinking these or not, but first off, Jordan and Egypt, they're not taking Palestinians because that would undermine the legitimacy of the rulers in those countries. So it puts their grip on power at risk. So it's not as though we can just say, well, we're going to cut funding by 10% and you've got to take in 1 million Palestinians or 500,000 or whatever the number is each. Like, it is threatening their existence of the ruling party. So that's going to take a pretty heavy strong arm to get them to do that, I would think. And to your point, they both come out and said, yeah, no, like, we still are not going to do that. The other thing is the Palestinians have signaled no interest in leaving Gaza. So you're talking about a forced movement. And whatever number you want to throw on Hamas, I've seen recently 40, 50,000 maybe Hamas militants, as in they've been reconstituted. More people have joined their ranks since the war began. If what we just saw over the last 16 months or something was Hamas trying to push Israel out, what does that war look like if we say, no, we're coming in to get you and we're going to pull you out forever? Like, it would have to be forcibly done. That seems incredibly challenging for anybody to pull off.
Well, you're missing the key part of his plan, which is that he's going to show them what he's going to build and they'll voluntarily leave because they're going to think it's going to look so great.
I think the lack of trust from the Palestinians towards the Americans is, like, I don't think there's anybody that would buy that. Like, that might end up being the argument made to forcibly displace people. But from the get-go, and from long before this war, the Palestinians largely, especially groups like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, so the militant groups, they point at the United States as having a direct role in their oppression. And then anytime somebody is killed, they say it's the United States and their ally Israel. So it's hard to see a scenario where Palestinian leadership says, but this time, on the biggest of the big questions, we trust the United States. I don't know that we're there, but
no, we're not. We were very close though. We said he'd be the line of Damascus, and it turns out he might be the line of Rafah. I don't know.
Kharkiv too. Kharkiv is still up in the
yeah,
in the
that's
air.
true. Yes,
we'll get to that.
But I heard through the grapevine that there's fighting. Our boy Jolani or Hezbollah is fighting for boy Jolani. What's going on there?
Yeah, he's flexing. Or Hezbollah kind of flexed. So when you look at a map of Syria, there's the southwestern portion where Israeli forces moved in because they're like, we don't really trust that this guy Jolani is going to be able to control Syria, for lack of a better term. They're still there, and they've actually started to build up like pretty decent infrastructure for military bases, like forward operating bases, things you would see us build in Iraq and Afghanistan, which means they're going to be there longer than the next week or two. You go further north, you run into the Syrian-Lebanese border, which famously is where a lot of Hezbollah's weapons came through over the years. There was some fighting up there yesterday. It's not clear. First off, it does look like it died down. It looks like it was just a minor skirmish, if you will. But it pretty quickly escalated to some Syrian fighters being taken prisoner by, I've heard a couple different, some have said they're just criminals, they're Lebanese criminals. Others have said they're Hezbollah elements that are funneling weapons to Hezbollah, but Hezbollah aligned maybe would be a way to put it. Syria responded by sending troops to the region, firing rockets from Syria, looks like into Lebanon. Not clear on casualties at this point, but Syria responded quickly, and for the time being, as we're recording this, it looks like they haven't managed to wind their way into a war with Lebanon, which is, a net positive, I'd say, all around. But the concerns were there for a couple hours yesterday.
Well, that's good. Glad that it's been sorted out. Also, see, Jolani did a podcast.
I haven't listened to it yet, have you?
No, I haven't. But I was shocked that he did a podcast, and I was also a little offended because we gave him the honorable title of friend of the pod, and then he invites on these British men.
Yeah.
What about the tried and true, Old Glory here? I mean, do you think it was disrespectful, and do you think we should strip his title from him?
Probably some sort of probation. I don't know. He's got a lot on his plate right now. Again, we'll see how this conflict shakes up. Also, Trump is talking about pulling troops out of Syria, so maybe it's Jolani's way of signaling. Like, look, if you're talking about pulling troops out that are actively fighting Islamic State and kind of keeping Turkey at bay, I'm not going to go on the Unclassified podcast. It's entirely possible we got caught up in some geopolitical moves there and didn't even realize it.
You're entirely right. We're being sanctioned and oppressed. But speaking of sanctions, the ICC, the United States, has now sanctioned the International Criminal Court for pursuing arrest warrants for Israeli officials who are not U.S. citizens. And the world has come out against us, condemning the sanctions, which is not great. Thoughts?
We need a better stance towards things like the ICC because we're not members of it.
Correct.
And we sure did like it when they were going after Putin. And then we really did not like it when they went after Netanyahu. And it doesn't take a genius to look at that and say, what the hell is going on there? So I think we just need to come up with a better, if we're just going to be, we need a better way of navigating that. And I wouldn't say I'm surprised with the sanctions because this is, again, something that the Trump team, I should say, has talked about since they first put out those arrest warrants. And then you look at the cabinet picks, this kind of lines up exactly with what he would do. We'll see. If you look at the world stage, we're already on that side of supporting Israel. Everybody views the United States in that camp. This is another step viewed as defending and supporting Israel. So, maybe it's more ammo for certain parties, but it's not like anybody's going to see this and go, oh, my God, look at the United States backing up Israel.
Yeah, I agree. We need a better policy because just we helped found the International Criminal Court knowing that it's a part of the world order that we're not going to follow. There are a lot of things like this where we add institutions into the world order that we exempt ourselves from, and that's fine, I guess. That comes with you being the head of the order, right? But we just have to figure out, because it's not a good look to be sanctioning it, especially when we've set the court up as a court for everybody else but us, right? So I don't know. You're right. We need a different policy there.
Yeah, look, and so generally speaking, the arguments for it's this world order, right? We're all going to abide by the same rules. And it gives it legitimacy. Whereas, Putin and Netanyahu are traveling relatively freely right now, even though they both technically could be arrested at any time they leave their country. And neither one of them seems overly concerned that that's going to happen, as long as they don't go to certain countries. The argument against has generally been that we don't want to outsource, that this could be weaponized by other countries against our people, our systems, our leaders, and we don't want to run that risk. And I understand that, but I just feel like we need to come down on that one way or the other because the hypocrisy, I think, actually makes us look really bad. And in following foreign media, we get called out on that hypocrisy left and right. Again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we like it sometimes and don't like it others.
It's like an unforced error, right? Our hypocrisy in the UN or whatever, it's excusable. But the ICC is we're not even a member of it. So it's just unforced error. But speaking of the ICC and Putin traveling, did you see the United States, previously when South Africa was hosting things, they told Putin that he couldn't come because they're going to arrest him. And now they've waived that. And now the United States is boycotting the G20 in Johannesburg, South Africa.
I did see that. This is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, so I'm interested in your takes here, Ben. This is part of the challenge right now with, and I think this will change a little bit, but Trump came in and his team just like shifted policy in a lot of different directions. And like this anger towards South Africa is not something that was on my radar. But that's what it's about, right? There's a frustration with South Africa.
I mean, yeah, he's surrounded by South Africans. Elon, Peter Thiel, David Sachs. They believe that South Africa is targeting white people there, and now for whatever reason, Trump also seems to care about it. I don't know. I mean, whether or not this is happening, I have no idea. But the more important part is that we've gone to like G20s in China and Russia and Saudi Arabia. I don't get why we draw the line here, right? Like instead we're just ceding the ground to China. To me, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it is hard to track right now exactly some of these moves, if I'm being honest. The ceding the power thing, and I think we'll get into this here shortly, but the USAID shutdown is a good example where there is certainly issues to be had and things that need to be addressed, but it does seem like there's a lot of spaces right now where we're just kind of opening the door to adversaries to like, hey, we're going to cede this space, do with it what you will. The G20 is, of course, very much a like professional button-down type event, and we're not going to be there now. But then the USAID thing as well, it opens up scenarios for, I would say, mostly China, a little bit Russia, but mostly China, to step in around the world and be like, remember how the United States dropped the ball here? Made promises they didn't keep? We gotcha. For like relatively cheap cost. It's hard to follow that strategy, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. It does not really make any sense. Do you want to jump into USAID, or do you want to go to Europe and Ukraine? What are we feeling here?
Let's go to the USAID thing. We'll kind of do that move from domestic to international, and then I think we can get into Ukraine.
So, yeah, USAID is gone. It is done. They've laid off everyone but 270 workers. They've called the mission home. There's been what I would call a misinformation attempt by the State Department to say, well, we're merging it into USAID's merging into the State Department, and therefore none of the aid's going to go anywhere, which is like not true, because by getting rid of USAID, you get rid of the logistics and the supply chain that makes things like PEPFAR, which is our HIV/AIDS program, work, right? All these programs require logistics and personnel and people who are in their spot doing it, and these people who are being laid off from USAID aren't being moved from like USAID to the State Department. They're just getting fired. And these people are, they're humanitarians. They move to these countries that are less fortunate than us, that are developing, and they live there, they raise their kids there. They're very dedicated to the cause. So it's been very weird to see this, I would call it the villainization of USAID, right? You have Elon Musk calling it villainous, rogue, whatever. He's just lying like crazy about it. He's saying there's fraud there, which, as far as I know, they have not discovered any fraud. Every example of fraud I've seen has not been fraud. So it's really bad. I mean, we can get into the consequences here. I mean, of course, tens of millions of people will die around the globe over the next 3 years from our lack of assisting. And people say, well, why don't other people take care of it? Well, I mean, you're in a global influence game, right? So other people will step in. They will take care of it. But, the United States, you'll look back and you'll say, well, why is Africa? Why is Thailand? Why does, Latin America? Why do they all care? Why do they all like the Chinese better than me? And it'll be because of this. And so it's really, really unfortunate. And I don't see where the move is here, right? And it just seems along the same lines. When it comes to USAID, for every 40 lies that you see online, there's one truth. It is going so fast, and there's like no actual way to combat it.
Yeah, it's I'm doing my best to keep an open mind with a lot of this stuff because it's coming from a direction that it's hard to see coming. So a lot of things that I would have thought a week or two ago are kind of turned on their head, and I'm trying my best to understand like the why and the how and what to take away from it. And with USAID, something, first off, very small agency, all things considered, in the United States. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Definitely some programs that have gotten a little out of control because that's the nature of government or any big company. Like 100%, they're going to find stuff in there where it's like, cool, that is not how we should be spending our money. And I think a lot of it is being viewed in the sense of we have no money. We are so far in debt that every penny counts, like you would look at a budget for your house. So that's where things like, are we funding a, I don't know, DEI, this, that, or the other in Colombia? Why? Like, how does that help America? And I understand the pushback on that. I think this is a little bit the fault of not being honest with why these funds are being used. And it's not the reason people think. I think when we hear that right now, people are like, yeah, it's fraudulent to advance a leftist ideology or something. I would say what we've not been honest with is that we genuinely care about children in Africa. I'm sorry. Like, we're doing those things to advance some degree of American interest. It's not that we care about, reporters being the best that they can be in Moldova. It's that we're doing that to try to possibly shed some light on what could be Russian criminal activities that would give us, like, it's all supposed to be, how it was originally designed, supposed to be like an arm of the U.S. government, if you will. And the very cold way of viewing this is all of it should be to benefit us. And I think we've done a bad job in recent years. I think we've done a horrible job about this with the war in Ukraine, where people are like, the argument from the Biden administration largely was it's the right thing to do. We stand up for democracy. And people are like, I don't understand. That's like, I'm not making that connection. Like, sure, I want to be a good guy, but at what cost? And do I want to be a good guy at the risk of starting a nuclear war? The argument hasn't been made that it benefits us to see Russians die on the battlefield, to be blunt. And I think it's the same thing with a lot of these USAID programs. Not all. Again, there's certainly some junk in there that could be stripped away. But like, those are there for us to help the United States, help us with trade agreements that help cheaper goods come into the United States, help us to influence the direction of politics, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's what they're doing to try to benefit the United States long term. And I feel like that got pushed aside, and the view of USAID is we just want to make, women in Mexico feel needed or something. Like, it's like, well, how are you going to convince somebody that matters?
Right. Well, yeah, there's also like a lot of going through it. And like you said, like, they're not explaining it very well. They should have explained it better. But there's also a lot of people going through things and not understanding why we do certain things. Right? Like, there's like a lot of like, I've seen people call it woke for our like women empowerment programs in Pakistan and other areas around the globe. And it's like, the reason we promote women equality, women empowerment is like very simple. That if you look at the G20, every single country there that does not have oil as their main export has women and men equal in society, because when women work jobs like men, economies do better and people get richer and the country is doing better, and as a result there's less terrorism, there's less crime, right? Like, these are like very self-explanatory things. There's also less migration, which is a big concern for us as well, right? So this whole USAID is to stabilize the world. And I also say I don't like, and we'll get to this with the celebrities and everything here in a second. I don't like how they keep saying Doge found this, Doge found this. Doge didn't find anything. You're just going to usspending.gov, usaspending.gov.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, and they're like, well, we're all finding about USAID together. Maybe you are, but for the rest of us who know how government works, knows that like Congress appropriated all of it, and you could have seen this at any time you wanted. Just because you learned how to use the internet for the first time this week, I mean, get a grip.
That has been a funny aspect of this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah. I mean, what's going on with these celebrities? I mean, I've heard Political and the New York Times are USAID projects. I mean,
I can't even keep up with that. I want to hammer on the soft power thing real quick before we get into some of this ridiculousness. Just think, if I'm China right now, I'm going through that USA spending website, pulling out everything with USAID and sending and calling them saying, like, we'll fund it. Like, right away. So they're getting concerned that the United States is going to walk away or has walked away. China, for pennies on the dollar, can go in, find all of these existing programs with existing infrastructure in areas that are clearly important to the United States and be the savior. You're going to take all of those people. Now, they're not going to be able to get USAID employees from the United States on their payroll, but all of these surgery centers in remote villages in Africa and AIDS programs and wherever it might be, like, we have that information public. China has to be running through that list right now and just going one after the other, calling them saying, you've got a new donor. How can we help? Because, oh my God, that is a softball. And if the funding does go away, then China's locked in. If the funding doesn't go away, they're now trying to decide, do we go with China or the United States that just like randomly didn't pay our bills and we couldn't figure out what was going on for a few weeks? So,
without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. And it's worth mentioning here on this podcast, the budget for USAID is $38 billion. That is 0.02% of the federal budget. It is, like Preston said, pennies on the dollar. The average American taxpayer, when you remove the ultra-rich from the tax calculation, pays around $40 a year. So, like, this is not, the average American pays $19,000 in taxes. So, stripping away $40, not a whole lot, right? And instead, we just sacrifice our influence. But tell me what's going on here with the Russian disinformation. We have celebrities. I mean, news outlets have had released statements. I mean, what's going on here?
This is part of the headache with, again, like, transparency, good. More information, good. Cost savings, good. Trim the fat, good. Like, across the board. But some of the stuff we've seen in recent days has been absolute madness. So there was a doctored video that, or not even doctored, just like, it was just a video clipped together of celebrities that were in Ukraine with text overlaid on top of it saying these celebrities were paid by USAID to, quote, support Ukraine. Now, again, that wasn't from any like online disclosures. So there's no like receipts to verify that. It actually had the watermark for a company that had to come out and say, we didn't make that, which is this doppelganger thing that Russia's actually done in the past. Or instead of like NewYorkTimes.com, Russia will stand up NYTimes.com or something close enough and make the website look like the same thing, and then just randomly insert in these super shady articles. But then you get a link from what you think is NewYorkTimes.com, and you're like, must be legit. Doppelganger. So kind of looks like something Russia's done in the past. And it flew across the internet, man. Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. both shared it, talking about how this is a crazy example of fraud, waste, and abuse, and can you believe this happened? And within like 12 hours, Russia Today and Rybar, a major Russian media channel, came out and said, yeah, that's fake. But listen, we should pay attention because it worked. And you can see how the authors here kind of played on U.S. emotions, looking at the fraud, the possible fraud in the U.S. government and how that plays into support for Ukraine. So take this as a lesson learned and expect to see more of it going forward. So Russia is using that as a good example of a disinformation campaign. And, of course, I don't want to shock anybody, but that didn't stop it from continuing to spread. In fact, the comment sections on those videos were people getting angry at Russia Today, saying, looks like somebody's been bought out. Who's writing your checks, Russia Today?
We put out a video defending USAID, and people said, oh, now you're being paid by USAID? What? But the big, I mean, you're right, the celebrity thing's absolutely nuts. I kept seeing these posts, people say Ben Stiller's paid $40 million for this photo. Now I was like, that's definitely not true. But they found through the public spending information, they found that the government pays for Politico Pro, which is, they also pay for the Bloomberg Terminal and LexisNexis. and they pay for they're like trade publications with big databases and stuff like that. So like Bloomberg, it's you can you can see the whole bond markets in real time, and Politico Pro, you get these deep dives in the legislation, it's like where they are in your country and also other countries. It's a great tool. Well, anyways, they found this and they believe it. They're calling it a subsidy, that they're paying for it. It's a transaction, right? The government wanted access to these. They paid it, and then that is how like a transaction works, right? But now the government has ordered the Treasury and the rest of the government to get rid of all Bloomberg Terminal and all Politico Pro stuff. So now the Treasury will no longer be allowed to look at the bond market, which seems good. So yeah, it's and I can't be clear enough. I mean, it's a transaction. They're not being subsidized, right? Like the government buys things all the time. I just don't see the issue here. But the reaction is big enough that now everyone in the federal government is banned from using government funds to buy Bloomberg Terminal or Politico Pro.
That's an interesting one because so much, and I've talked about it before, like there's so many good private sector solutions to things in the government. And from my understanding, that's largely been a big push from Trump and Musk and others, is that there's a lot of innovation out here in the private sector if we can leverage that instead of some of these older government processes. That's what this is. So this is the government going to the private sector and being like, you have good data sets and analysis. We want to use that to inform our decision making, our policy making, and they got rid of it. I think it feels very much like this is a media firestorm that got out of control before anybody could rein it in.
I mean, it's very possible. I mean, it's spreading like wildfire, and it even though it's very easily disprovable. But let's get into this trade war here really quick. On Saturday, President Trump announced that we're going to put 25% sanctions on Mexico and Canada, and the reason being we're not open to negotiations. We're not looking for concessions. We're here to make America rich again through this new economic policy of tariffs. And then, come Monday, it's all been resolved. What happened, Preston? What's your read?
So I've seen a couple different angles here. By and large, on the two different, we got to look at these separately because they are two separate agreements, two separate negotiations. Mm-hmm. On the Mexico side, it looks like the big difference was now all of these negotiations have been kicked down the road 30 days. Is that correct, Ben? So
yeah, we get to do all of this all over again the last week of February. Yes.
Super. Yeah, good. I'll block it off.
Yeah.
So Mexico committed to sending 15,000 troops to the border. And a couple things. I saw this to help, seal the border from the Mexican side. Mexico is doing a fair amount on their side of the border. You could argue that it's not enough. But I do think it's worth stressing that they have done a lot of work in recent years to try to lock down the border because they see this. They're like, this is not good for us if people in the United States keep blaming us for everything that's happening there. So it's not like they went from 0 to, I'll say 10,000. I might be wrong. It might be 15,000, but instead of saying both over and over again, I'll stick with 10. Now, a lot of the pushback there was people said, look, they did the same thing when Biden came into office back at the beginning of his term, which something that I have not been able to find is, but did those troops stay there or is that a short-term surge? Because if that was a short-term surge of troops to the border and they left, then sending 10,000 new troops to the border is a significant difference. If they added 10 on top of the 10 that were already there, that's also a significant difference. So it looks like it was a very similar strategy to what they did under Biden, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it is the exact same thing and already happened. There's clearly something different did happen there. On the northern border, it's a little harder to find what exactly took place because in December, Trudeau made all of these different announcements about what they were going to do on their border, increase patrols, send more border guards there, all sorts of different things. $1.3 billion, I think, dedicated to this. Again, that was announced in December. The agreement they seem to have come to is that will go forward along with the appointment of a fentanyl czar, which I'd like to just like, when did we start calling everything czars? I feel like that was in my lifetime. It didn't always. It wasn't always a thing. We haven't always had a czar.
No,
but
was not.
It doesn't. It's not clear what we really got out of that. We pissed off a lot of Canadians. I know that. Seems like we probably pissed off some folks in Mexico. The stock market took a dip and then climbed right back up because this was like a 24-hour trade war. Yeah, what's your take here, Ben?
My take on it is I don't see this as a win for Trump as it's being heralded, because when he put the tariffs in place, he said he wasn't looking for concessions or negotiations. The tariffs are going to make our country rich, and that's how it's going to go. So, whatever. So it kind of just seems like negotiations are Trump inherently caving. But on the other side of things, I also see that when it comes to this whole fentanyl thing, over 90% of all fentanyl in the United States comes through legal ports of entry, and it's being trafficked by 85% of them are Americans. So I'm not sure what, a fentanyl czar in the north and troops in the south are going to do to cut the fentanyl thing. But I think the important aspect here is that, Canada pledged to do what they were already doing, right? But with Mexico, the United States did make a concession, which is that they're going to stop the trafficking of heavy weaponry into Mexico, which is interesting. Because it implies to me, at least, I will concede that maybe Canada caved, or maybe no one caved in the North. That just simply, they all agreed that like the PR win will be here is that Canada announced they're going to do what they already did, right? Whatever. But it seems to me that maybe Claudia Sheinbaum won, and that she deploys these troops to the border who may or may not have already been there, and in exchange, the U.S. stops the trafficking of weapons. I don't know. I mean, it seems like she got something out of it.
Well, hold on. I want to dig into that for a second. The U.S. trafficking of weapons makes it sound like illegal shipments from the United States of arms going into Mexico. Is that what we said we would stop?
Yes.
Why do we have illegal shipments of arms going into Mexico?
Well, like the government's not sending it, but like criminals are.
So we committed to crack down more on that.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, the way you, maybe it's just the way I heard it, was like,
no,
we're
I
going to turn that off real quick.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah,
wait, turn the program off.
Yeah. I totally framed it wrong. But I don't know. The whole media thing was like he averted a crisis. He negotiated. I don't know. It just often feels like if Trump threatened to nuke the universe at 3 a.m. unless the sun came up at 6, and then the sun comes up at 6 and he declares victory, it seems like people would just give it to us and call the rest of us who are like, this is a bad idea, morons or something. I don't know. The whole thing's exhausting.
It's also it's flooding the zone right now too, right? So we're talking about this trade deal that would have been, this trade war that should have been and could have been a much bigger story. To your point, it's still unresolved. We're going to get back to it in a couple of weeks here. And then you blink, and now we're occupying Gaza. So, like, you cannot.
Yes.
Like, there's no time to go back to Canada, love you. You guys are great. I got to worry about this Middle East war we're getting ready to start. You know what I mean? Like, we just. And what. A lot seems to happen on Friday, I want to point out, or so far. Historically, we've seen administrations do two things on Fridays. Either like nothing, because they know it's not going to get any coverage. So they don't want to say anything grandiose of like, look at this wonderful thing, because they know that the media is not going to pick it up on a Friday afternoon like they would on a Monday. So there tends to be very little information that comes out, or they put out stuff that they want to kind of see buried. Like, we have to put this out. We just don't want it to get a lot of traction. A good example is when Secretary Austin, they found out that he had been in the hospital for like 3 days and didn't tell, or whatever the timeline was, and didn't tell President Biden. That information came out on a Friday afternoon. So you can look at that and be like, oh, so you had to say this. You definitely didn't want to have to say this. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration, the way they're working right now is they're putting out major news 7 days a week. So like this was an issue with the USAID stuff a couple days ago. Like, they started going buck wild over the weekend, and it seemed like the entire rest of the government was like, God, yeah, it's crazy. We'll see what it looks like on Monday.
Yep. Yeah, it is so crazy. And I'll note the past 2 or maybe 3 of the episodes we've done in the Trump era we've talked about something on here, and then he's immediately made what we said totally like outdated because he's reversed his decision or he's done something else, and it's just like, ay caramba, like what are we doing here? But speaking of stuff being outdated, Preston, what is going on with the U.S. government? Does it even still exist? What is happening here?
I heard, can't believe I forget the guy's name. A reporter that keeps referring to Doge as dogs, and it's hilarious. Like, he's intentionally mispronouncing it, and it's becoming really, really funny. Where he's like, Elon's dog boys are over there. Like, maybe it doesn't sound funny. It is hilarious as he keeps like intentionally butchering that, because I know there's people that like it's really frustrating. Ryan Grimm is the guy's name. The reporter, yeah. and he keeps saying something that I think is really interesting, where he keeps saying, these little laws or pesky little laws that are getting in the way. He says those don't matter in a revolution. And it's interesting when you think about it that way. So like, if you look at this and say like, well, they can't do that because A, B, C, and D, it's like, you wouldn't say that in a revolution, right? Giuliani can't march on Syria because that's where the Syrian army is. Well, it's a revolution, man. He's taken Syria. Like, it's kind of now that doesn't mean like the government is falling or we're at the end of the reign of the American Republic, anything like that at all. Just like, that might be the viewpoint that some people are looking at this through, to where norms are all kind of pushed aside while we're stuck looking at it. If we're looking at it through the lens of this is going to be adjudicated in the court system and there's going to be congressional hearings and public investigations, like, maybe not. And I think that's hard to. We might be there. That might be what's happening.
It's very startling because they seem to have access to everything, and Trump does not seem to be entirely aware. At least when they ask him about it, and maybe that's like a tactic, right? Or you just like act like you don't know. I don't know. But, they're in the Treasury, and there's the whole thing of it's read-only, but then it's read and write-only, and now they have the ability to change code, so much so that Elon tried to get the Treasury, they tried to get them to change the code in the Treasury to block all funding the USAID, so that the Treasury wasn't dispersing funds there, which is like, no one elected this man, and no one elected his gang of teenagers, which on that, his dog boys, as you said, he says illegal to name them. And then the attorney for Washington, D.C., the U.S. attorney, was like, yeah, anyone who names them or threatens them or anything like that, we're going to crack down. We're going to get to the core of it. It's like, what? Well, anyways, though, but new federal employees, a couple of them made a memo, I think it's a couple hundred, where they say that his team is embedding itself within the U.S. government, bypassing oversight and centralizing authority under a new, privately controlled regime. Their goal, according to this, is to dismantle democratic institutions, replace them with a corporate autocracy where unelected executives hold unchecked power. That's not great. And I don't have any issue with a committee to cut costs, but it seems like Elon Musk is doing a information heist, and I don't see any reason why he needs all of this information at all. I don't see why he needs to illegally fire people either. I think if he wants to cut spending, he can just lobby the Republican-controlled Congress to cut spending, because they have to do that within 35 days or the government shuts down. So I don't know why he insists on doing it this way, because they have all the power in the world to do it the correct way.
Yeah, I mean, corporate autocracy doesn't sound good. I don't like that at all. Where I've been stuck recently, just to kind of get it all out there, is I remember during the last Trump administration where everything he did was immediately met with, this is the end of democracy as we know it. The United States is falling apart. And like that, if we're being generous, that was exaggerated. In some cases, I think people were just outright fear-mongering. And so I have that in my mind when breaking stories come out right now. Like, is this going to be the same as whatever example you want from 2017 where something was hyped immediately as the end of the United States and it just wasn't at all. So I have a little bit of that in my mind. Clearly any push towards a corporate autocracy with unchecked power is a bad thing. Not in favor, even 0.1% of that. But what I'm kind of at odds with here in this whole process is there's a lot of change that needs to be done in the U.S. government. I mean, even if you hear some of the challenges these guys are running up against in Treasury is they're trying to deal with code that's been in place for like 40 years. Like, that is unsustainable. That has to change. But changing anything in this monstrosity of an entity that is the federal government is unattainable, right? So as an example, in the Army, we changed our physical fitness test a couple of years ago. It used to be the APFT, the Army Physical Fitness Test. We changed it to the ACFT, Army Combat Fitness Test. The old test was you do 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, and then you run 2 miles. That was it. You could do it pretty easily. This new one, it probably took like 5 years to roll out start to finish, if not more, now that I'm thinking about it. A fitness test, Ben. This is not like the next generation stealth fighter that we're trying to deploy across multiple domains. I'm talking about getting our soldiers to run and see if they're in shape. It took 5 years. And throughout that process, we would implement something, try it out for a few months, and it would fall apart, and we'd start again with new tests. And then somebody would come in and say, actually, we're doing away with that. We're going back to the old one. 5 years for the Army to change their physical fitness test. So if you're looking at changing something, and it's still running into a lot of hiccups, I should mention. If we're looking at changing anything of significance across the U.S. government, it feels unattainable. So with that in mind, I do have the understanding that, like, there might be a value at times of, like, not starting from zero, but you got to go hard if you're actually going to make any sort of change. The balance there is some of this stuff maybe can't be fixed once it's built back up. To use the USAID as an example, right? Some of those programs, people are going to die now. So, like, we might figure out some of that funding issue, but, like, it's going to cost lives in the near term. But it's really slow. It's really big. It's thick with bureaucracy. And I don't know that going about that in a very slow, methodical way would see any sort of change. That's where I'm kind of stuck right now.
I think my viewpoint is that, like, this move fast, break things approach that Silicon Valley has, I think is really great for, like, making a burrito app. But, like, when it comes to, like, the Treasury, just messing with the code and hoping it works, right, without, like, a long tested process, that could be disastrous, right? Fully. Especially when they're locking other officials out of it, and then downloading all the data from it. I just am not on board with it. Government should work faster. It should not take several years. But when it comes to things like this, I don't know, because it will affect people's lives. I mean, if they break something, who knows how long it could be till it's fixed, especially since we're firing everyone. But on the fixing things and firing people. So the Australian, let me pull up their exact name here. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute determined that the United States trails China in research for 57 of 64 critical technologies. This is not new information necessarily. This is stuff like AI, semiconductor, renewable energy, and in December there was a bipartisan consensus that we needed to double staff at the National Science Foundation. Which is like our research and development people. They do all kinds of things there, and they lead a lot of the research that ends up going into the U.S. economy. Anyways, the Trump administration or Elon Musk announced that they're going to be cutting 50% of the staff in all government, not all government, in the National Science Foundation. What are we doing here? To me, in December, everyone agreed in Congress that we need more people, and now we're not. I don't know. And then on top of like the CIA news, where they got rid of all the new hires, and then they sent an unclassified list of all the CIA's new hires for the past 2 years who focus on China to the White House. And in addition to that, they're also told to offer buyouts in hopes to cut their workforce down by 40%. I just think I don't know. The reason we're in debt is because of tax cuts and because our population's aging, right? We're not having enough kids, and we're aging really fast. Pretty soon the baby boomers will be there to have Social Security, they're going to have Medicare, Medicaid, and simply put, medical costs also rise faster than debt. Hang with me here. I know debt's a very boring topic, but like coming here and taking a hatchet to everything, that's not going to fix the debt problem, right? If anything, you're just going to break things, and then we're just not going to have saved any money either. But on top of this cut at the National Science Foundation, they've also paused all grants, all research funding. I just fear that in Elon's attempt to get a tax cut here, we are just throwing it out to China right now. And that we're just sacrificing everything for the sake of what exactly? It still has not been made clear to me what the end game of Doge is. I'm very concerned about what the end goal is here.
So if you look at it from the other side here, though, all of these changes largely have been with things that are outwards facing. And I think I can understand why. Like you were saying that the major component of the debt is a couple different things. I would argue that it's defense. Like if you look where we spend money, right? Is defense, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest. It'll be interesting what happens when the doggy boys get to the Pentagon. There's not a lot of interest.
Well, I mean, there's no way they're let in, right? So there's like debate as to whether or not they're
at this rate they've been permitted to go everywhere. So why would they not be able to do that? Hegseth, if anything, Hegseth to me is a tough one because I want the defense secretary to be a guy that like pushes back against the president, but I also understand why no president would necessarily hire somebody that's going to push back on everything they do. So Hegseth is, based off what we've seen at this point, like I don't see him drawing a line there. I see him saying like, yeah, let these guys in.
Well, there's like a big debate whether or not these guys have top security clearances or if they're getting
at this point.
Right, or if they're just getting because like they raided a skiff at USAID and the Treasury Department. They're exiting classified information, but with what authority, right? And the only thing we know is that Elon threatens to fire the guards who are guarding the skiffs. Which for people who don't know, a skiff is like it has all the classified information in an area, and you need like a special clearance to go in. You can't bring your phone or anything like that. But they're apparently bringing their computers in there and everything. So I don't know what authority they have to do that, and so I can't imagine. I think the Pentagon, you're right, maybe Hegseth will roll over to it, but I feel like, I mean, you show up to the CIA for your computer, I feel like, you're not going to have a good time, right? I feel like they're going to say... I feel like that's where the train stops unless they have a security clearance. What do you think?
Well, there's a couple different things there. First off, I think you have to keep that thing in mind of it's you're looking at a lot of this through I understand it, the legal frameworks we have today. But again, if the people perpetrating this are viewing it as a revolution, they're not concerned about that. And what's to stop? I mean, you saw some of the pardons that went through right as Biden was leaving office, right? We're preemptively pardoning people because we think they might be targeted politically. What's not to say the entire Doge staff isn't preemptively pardoned? Like, does that really seem outside the realm of possibility? So that means that they can just do whatever they want at this point. With the classified stuff, it's a little harder because it's not as simple as like you can just turn on the computer. You have to have credentials to get into a classified system. Even what you do, there's a lot of safeguards to prevent leakage. So like you can't go into a classified system and plug a non-classified computer into it and start to download stuff because the ports are turned off. Like they've done a really good job over the years at trying to prevent these leaks. So it'd be harder to do that, but it's far from impossible. It'll be interesting. I'm interested to see what happens. Again, like I think we're making valid arguments as to why USAID is important. It's an important soft power instrument for the United States. There are some impacts here in the U.S. I know here in Tennessee, we have farmers that send money or send food. They get paid by USAID to send their food to countries overseas. Like those contracts are out. Those are like my neighbors here in Tennessee, right? But by and large, USAID, state, FBI, CIA, Treasury is a bad example. Those other ones are outward facing, and we don't really feel the impact day in and day out. So I think it's like that's probably why they're going after these so quickly. What happens when that turns towards the VA or even defense?
Oh, yeah.
Honestly, we do spend a lot of money on defense. The vast majority of it is directed at our activities overseas or possible activities overseas. But we, as a country, tend to like spending money on the military. Most people don't want to see that cut. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, you're right. What was I going to say? Oh, I know they're coming for Social Security here next. They say they're going to show up to the Social Security Administration. Elon's talked about just cutting it all together, getting rid of the payments to it, which would be... I think that's where this ends, right? I think that's where the Doge change ends when they mess with Social Security. Donald has threatened, or not Donald, President Trump has threatened or has pledged to protect it. Like, that's his whole thing, right? And, he's all about it. And messing with Social Security, it's a vital part of the economy because it's how, the whole reason we have it, so old people, can spend money quite liberally in their economy and keep things going. And when he messes with that,
or live, like pay rent
or
and
live,
stuff, yeah.
Well, yeah, that too. Yeah, it's when you mess with that, that's probably where this gravy train ends. And Elon Musk is, I don't know, maybe Trump will be like Napoleon and send him off to an island, send him to Guam. But the DOJ has gotten rid of the Election Foreign Interference Task Force, as well as a task force that focused on Russian oligarchs in seizing their entities, their goods, their funds, their yachts. Thoughts?
I haven't heard the argument why those are bad.
To get rid of them or to keep them?
To get rid of them. This goes back to where I'm kind of, again, there's too much happening, right? I don't have the time in the day to get into all of this stuff. When I saw both of those, my first thought was, what was the problem with either one of those? Like, what is the defense of getting rid of? They both seem like things that we would want to have in place. Do you know what the argument is against that?
No. And as far as I know, there is not one. Whenever you ask about it,
somebody's defending it. Somebody's defending it. And they're going to get a question at a press conference, and they're going to say A, B, C, and D. I just haven't seen that.
As far as I know, Pam Bondi has not done a press conference with this question yet because it was eliminated last night. I've seen people say we're going to replace it with something better or something that's not lived up. I don't know. But this comes as the FBI has now been forced to hand over a list of every agent who investigated January 6th or President Trump for his crime he committed and his alleged crimes that he was accused of but never went to trial for. That doesn't seem good.
And we should note that's coming from the FBI. So memos from the FBI have come out from the director, letters from the director to the staff. So that's not it's part of the challenge here, man, is what is real and what is not, because that was one that certainly did not sound real when it first hit the news cycle. But the FBI is saying that it is. I don't like that top to bottom. It is hard for me to understand any scenario where that's good, any scenario where that is a positive for the rule of law in the United States. Anybody who looks at that from inside of that organization, I have to think it's gonna scare them and make them think twice about not just, maybe you can go after people at the top that you think are politically motivated, and in any organization, I got it. You don't want that, right? These are supposed to be apolitical folks in a lot of these organizations, but there's also a lot of people that are just doing their job legally. Like, it's not the Hitler Nazi example of I was just following orders, but like genuinely following legal instructions, the scope of your job, where if you didn't do that, you would have lost your job, rightfully so. That's pretty concerning. So we'll see where that that goes here in the next couple days.
Yeah, it's not great, and I don't understand why he's so I know it's like revenge, but like you control the whole thing, and by the time you get out of office, you're going to be 84 years old, and you're probably not going to have much longer left. So it's just like, I don't know. Do you really think they're going to come after you with these? You just won the popular vote. I mean, do you think these prosecutions resume once you're gone? I don't know. But getting away from this country because it gives me a headache. Did you see the Trump administration is dedicated to the denuclearization of North Korea?
No, I did not.
It came out 10 minutes before we started recording. So they're dedicated to the denuclearization of North Korea. That's interesting. So here's a little backstory for our listeners. And I guess you, Preston, but I assume you know, you're all-knowing. And so in the first administration, Trump was like, I'm going to make a deal with Kim Jong-un. This is after like they threatened to nuke each other a few times back and forth. Then they had the conference in Hanoi, and there was another place that had a conference, and then they met at the DMZ. And the conference in Hanoi was supposed to be like this big breakthrough moment where the United States, Trump's aides in the State Department were like, we think you should pursue an arms control deal, right? So North Korea, perhaps they stop nuke construction now, or they cut back how many they're going to make, or maybe they max out at a limit, and then in exchange, like, we won't deploy nukes in Japan or South Korea or whatever, right? Well, Trump was like, no, I got this. And so he went there and he said, I want you to give up all your nuclear weapons. And Kim was like, no. And that is where that ended. And then, of course, they went on and met later on at the DMZ. Now they're saying they want to complete denuclearization of North Korea. I don't really know how that works. I don't know how you're going to do that exactly, unless you think you're going to win Kim over again. But again, I have no idea how you're going to do that. Any thoughts? The challenge
with North Korea and their nuclear weapons is they don't have anything else. So, like,
right.
If it's not for their nuclear weapons, then they are just a small, impoverished country that nobody cares about. Like, that's it. When you look at any other country that has nuclear weapons, there's more to it than that, right? So if you wanted to make a case for Russia to get rid of their nuclear weapons, you would talk about how, well, this might impact their deterrence and their ability to prevent a war of aggression or whatever. But, like, Russia's still going to be Russia. They just, maybe won't nuclear saber rattle as much. North Korea does away with their nukes like they're nothing. Nobody's talking about them anymore. Nobody cares about them anymore. Like, that is their sole point of leverage. They don't have anything to contribute to the world other than soldiers to go die in Kursk and the occasional artillery round and rocket launchers to Russia. Like, now that could change. They don't have to be like that forever, but the position that they've kind of taken over the last few decades now, or I don't even remember when they got nuclear weapons, but for a while now, that's it. So it's hard for me to understand a scenario where they would do away with those, because it's so much more than just do away with these and we won't attack you. It's their everything.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're Kim, before you had nuclear weapons, your dad was never given the privilege of meeting the president. Was never, now you have nuclear weapons, and it's brought the president of the United States to you, right? That has to be quite the ego pump, right? So, if you're Kim, you're right. I don't know why you'd ever get rid of nuclear weapons, but they seem to believe.
Listen, I'm on board with the denuclearization of North Korea, but I'm just kind of getting my head around the Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, where we're sending people in prisons, and we're going to invade Gaza. And if we could just focus in an area for a little while, that'd be super.
Yeah. Well, speaking of El Salvador, shall we? So El Salvador's president, Bukele, not a friend of the pod, just because I don't like his attitude. Most human rights abusers, for whatever reason, I give the honorable title to. But this guy, I just don't like his attitude. He's on Twitter, running his mouth, and it's like, I have a town that has a higher GDP than El Salvador. Why don't you shut it? But anyways, so he can fight me. But he offered.
Okay.
He met with
Throw you in
Marco
his prison.
Rubio. Yeah, you were right. I wouldn't last a day. Anyway, so Marco Rubio met with Bukele, and Bukele offered, I'll take any illegal or undocumented people, regardless of nationality, and I'll put them in my prison to hold them. And then he also said, I'll also take any Americans that you have jailed as well. And Marco Rubio, maybe he's new to this, but like I've never seen Blinken or Kerry or Pompeo, Tillerson. I'm trying to think who Bush's is, but I'm not going to say it because I think I'm too young. Hillary Clinton, I've never seen them talk about like an offer like this, but he was like, what a tremendous act of friendship. How kind. This is historic. No one's ever been this good of a friend to the United States before. And so then all the focus, though, was like primarily on the moving of U.S. citizens who have done crimes to El Salvador. And Marco Rubio was like, oh, we'll have to talk about it. And then the State Department like walks it back. And they're like, we have no plans to do this. Right? Like, it's very clearly illegal. Like, and then Marco himself's like, yeah, no. Like, I'm not sure it's illegal. We can't do that. Well, anyways, the press then asks the president about it, who's like, I think it's great. And then he's like, we need to send, he calls them animals. He's like, we need to send all our animals there. We have a lot of, very many countries that are looking to take them for a small fee, and I think it's worth it to get them out of here. And he kept saying it, and now, like 4 hours later, he said we're going to take over Gaza, so that's why there's not like a lot of focus on it. But that's what happened there. So interesting stuff. Maybe we're deporting Americans there. I'm like it's pretty unambiguously illegal, so I doubt they'll go through with it. But what a weird side. I feel like with every day, there is a main plot point, and then there are a bunch of side plots. And you never really know what the main plot is till you go to bed at night, right? Because the Gaza thing is the main plot.
You also can't ignore the side plots, which just drive me up the wall. Like, we're turning El Salvador into a prison colony. I guess, like, I don't really, if El Salvador wants to do that, cool. But, like, maybe I'm not smart enough to understand this, but if we take a bunch of, I'm not even going to touch the American citizens being shipped overseas to prisons.
Yeah.
Don't understand that one. But if we take, let's say, a Mexican citizen that is illegal in the United States, and we move them to an El Salvador prison, are we just, like, giving up on due process of any sort? Or, like, what does that look like? Is that just where they are now forever? Like, that's what I guess I don't understand. Like, is Mexico then going to send somebody to come to El Salvador to get their guy?
I know you're
I don't know.
right.
Maybe there's a clear answer to this, and I'm just not smart enough to see it.
No, you're right. It is a violation of the 14th and the 8th Amendment.
But they're not Americans. But these aren't American citizens, which is I'm sure that
everyone in the United States,
regardless.
Everyone in the United States, regardless of legal status, is entitled to equal protection under the law. That's what the 14th Amendment says. That's why, because like otherwise, like what, like tourists and like people traveling here just aren't subjected to our laws, right? Like that's not how it works, right? So everyone here is subjected, has the same legal rights and everything, regardless of their citizenship.
Yeah, and I guess if they've been convicted, then this is talking about people that have been convicted, because they're not just saying immigrants, they're saying the worst of the worst. So they're clearly talking about people who have been caught and have been convicted, so they're serving a prison sentence. So I guess then after they go back home. Is that the idea?
Yeah,
El Salvador's
I don't know what the El Salvador part of that looks like. I know he's looking for a way to subsidize his massive prison that people go into forever. I have no idea. I don't think anyone knows how it works. I've heard some people say that Trump has a history textbook and he's working forward. That's why you had tariffs and like expanding U.S. territory. And now we're in 1901, so now we're talking about Australia, and soon he'll find out that McKinley is dead, and then there's Teddy Roosevelt. We'll get to the Teddy Roosevelt, chapter here soon. So look out for the War of Spain. But Panama, a little bit to the south here. Panama, great song by Van Halen. Have you ever heard it before, Preston?
I'm sure I have. It's not ringing a bell, but.
It's great, and anyways,
will you sing a verse or two?
Yeah, Panama, bum, bum,
Okay.
Panama. Anyway, so they've left the Belt and Road Initiative, and then Trump said he's going to take control of it again, and like Rubio went there and they had a great, like, everything's fine. And then the State Department announced, well, we're going to waive all fees that the U.S. military vessels need that pay going through the canal, which I should know is $1 million a year, which is, you know, that's nothing to the United States, and especially to a developing nation like Panama. Is it really worth bullying them over paying $1 million a year to them? I mean, we're already at a discount from everyone else. But then they make this whole announcement, and Panama says that's just not true. The Panaman president says not true. The Panama Canal Authority also says not true at all. And then the State Department, as far as I know, just never followed up as to why they announced it if it wasn't true. And that's kind of where that stands now. But it seems like the U.S.-Panama thing kind of resolved, maybe. I think if you're Panama, Greenland, Canada, Mexico, you're kind of hoping he goes through with the invasion of Gaza, because then it's like the focus is off of you, right?
Yeah, you
so
just got to give it a few hours. Yeah.
You're right. Right. So Panama, you know, that's kind of stuck there where the U.S. announced the victory and Panama was like, that's not true. And then, it, you know, Gaza happens and everyone forgets. But speaking of annexations, Vladimir Putin, friend of the pod, he had, you know, Trump has a peace plan here coming up, leaked one allegedly, according to Ukrainian newspapers. Tell me about it, Mr. Preston.
Yeah, so came out in the Daily Mail, which not historically the most reliable. It's a tabloid, for we'll just say that. So take that for what it's worth. There is some speculation. Ukraine, I've not seen Ukraine comment on this at all. They commented on a previous leak saying there's no basis in reality for that. And I haven't seen them comment on this one. They probably have at this point. And there is some speculation that this was a Russian leak to try to kind of shift expectations ahead of the negotiations. So anyways, what this plan outlines is a ceasefire by April 20th. So coming up here pretty quick. NATO membership is off the table. Ukraine would recognize Russian sovereignty over their annexed territories and withdraw their troops from Kursk. There would be a demilitarized zone monitored by European, maybe British, but not American troops. EU would run reconstruction, an estimated cost of $486 billion over a decade. And then it's possible the U.S. would continue military aid for Ukraine, and possible Ukraine could pursue a path to EU membership by 2030. There's a lot of unknowns in this. First off, if Russia withdraws from all of their annexed territory and then there's a demilitarized zone, it's hard to see Russia agreeing to that. Remember, they have claimed via a 100% authentic, definitely nothing suspect at all, when 99% of the local population voted to join Russia in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, and then, of course, Crimea. So Russia says those are part of the Russian state. And according to this, Russia would withdraw from those areas. It's hard to see them buying that. They have been adamant from the get that they are not going to allow. Remember, one of their talking points is they don't want NATO on their border, ignoring the fact that NATO is already on their border. In this case, they don't want NATO on their border. So it's hard to see them saying, fine, we'll leave, pull in some troops from NATO countries that are not technically operating under NATO. Like, get out of here. They're not going to buy that. And then in this case, it's hard to see any scenario where Ukraine is like, good, that is what we need. No NATO membership, maybe no additional weapons. They lose territorial control. They give up Kursk. This got a lot of pushback yesterday from Ukrainian sources saying this is dead on arrival. We'll see. This does say that there's going to be a phone call organized between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky in early February. I don't know where you draw that line, but today's the 7th. I feel like we're coming up pretty close on mid-February, so that seems like it could be any day now. It's got to happen fast.
Yeah, I looked at the plan, and I thought there's just no way anyone's going to agree to that. Especially, I don't think NATO is going to be eager to because they're going for they want the alliance to agree to a ban at the summit in the Netherlands. I just don't see that.
Another
really
part here is that
Russia
regularly talks about any ceasefire would be temporary. It's a time to regroup and rearm. Now, they don't put that out through official channels, but all of their commentators regularly talk about that. So if you're Ukraine or NATO and you look at that and you're like, why would we? They're just openly saying that any ceasefire would be a temporary means for them to rearm and re-equip to then attack later on down the line. So it's not just Russia that's going to push back on this. I imagine there's going to be some pushback from Europe as well, and of course Ukraine.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I just don't see how this plan goes through. I just don't see how this takes effect.
I think the way to look at it is the opening point of negotiations. Nothing on this list is groundbreaking or new, even. And if you view it as like, this is what we're going to start talking from, maybe that is something, but some hard lines in there, for sure.
I think here's how I stand on the peace talks. I think if Ukraine is given NATO membership, they're much more willing to cede territory to Russia. But if you're just voluntarily ceding them territory and they're not getting NATO membership, I just don't see how this goes anywhere, right? Because we're just going to be right back here in 3 days because all Russia does is break their agreements. They're not good for any agreement. They can't be trusted. We're just wasting our time in these talks if that's how it's going to go.
Speaking of NATO membership, maybe that's something you can bring up next week. You can be a man on the move, right?
Yeah, I will be a man on the move. Yes. I'll be in Brussels next week. So if you see me and you want to say, hey, or maybe you want to shoot me, don't do that. But either one, you can do both. And that was kind of unhinged, wasn't it? But I was just, I was thinking about John Lennon last night, and I thought that'd be bad if it happened to me. Anyways, so that will be happening to me. But what do you think? Let me ask you this. What do you think about General
visit
Kellogg?
to Brussels, not to getting shot, to be clear. Go ahead.
Yeah. What do you think about General Kellogg saying that Ukraine can't develop nuclear weapons at all?
Yeah. Like, it seems like something the United States has not taken a opinion on yet. Ukraine, for those not aware, Ukraine has kind of floated this from time to time, saying if we're not going to be in NATO, then at least let us pursue nuclear weapons or give us nuclear weapons. We can use that as a form of deterrent. And it's actually been pretty widespread in Ukrainian circles as a viable alternative to NATO membership. Hearing a U.S. official come out opposed to nuclear proliferation seems like pretty in line with something the United States would say about like any country ever around the world. So that wasn't really surprising. But I mean, honestly, like if you were to press any U.S. official on this, that's probably what they were going to say, and probably would have said for a long time. I'm just not sure that like the Biden administration really ever had to answer that question.
No, I think you're correct. I think you're correct. I think I would personally, in a peace agreement, support Ukrainian nuclear weapons. But yeah, I can't see the United States kind of going along with that at all. And then to wrap us up here, Europe, our dear allies, Europe here, they're having talks to pursue a warmer relationship with China, whether or not they should. Thoughts? Are you pro EU China, China, or are you against it?
I'm not for anyone having closer relations with China, but I understand it. If you're Europe right now looking at kind of the turmoil with the U.S. and Canada and Mexico and Greenland and Panama and Colombia and Ukraine, and I get it. You look at that and you say, maybe we should see what our options are and not be so tethered to someone that, I mean, Trump just the other day said he's looking at imposing tariffs on the European Union. So I understand from their point of view why they would want to see what their options are, even if this is just a negotiating tactic from their end to kind of signal to Trump and the United States that, like, we're not fully captured by EU or don't have to be fully captured. Hate that it's even a consideration. I kind of wonder how many of these relationships have been taken for granted in one or both directions for a long time. I think we can make the argument, we're just talking about NATO. I think there's a good argument to be had that there are countries inside of the NATO alliance that have taken their relationship there for granted and have not. Canada actually might be a good example. Historically does not spend very much on defense, and maybe they've taken that for granted, right? I love Canada, love the Canadians, but that could be an example of maybe a relationship being taken for granted, and maybe we are at times taking the broader European relationship for granted.
I think it I think it differs by president, right? I think the Europeans take America for granted during Democratic administrations, and I think during Republican administrations, the United States takes Europe for granted. At least,
okay.
Yeah, that's how I think it shakes out. But yeah, the EU went to Trump in December and then again on January 29th, and they said, we want to team up on China with you. Like, let's do it. And they were kind of thrown for a loop with the Greenland stuff and then the tariff threats, and they're like not all about it. I don't know. It's a complicated thing here. But Germany's next leader gave this big speech, and he said, this America the past 3 weeks is one I don't recognize anymore. Which I was like, well, all right. Not good. Yeah, I mean, it's not wrong. And, he listed off everything we've talked about today. The pardons, the firing of prosecutors and FBI agents, the getting rid of watchdogs, the imperial ambitions. If you're Europe, you're probably, I'm not sure going to China is the answer, right? Because isn't that just kind of going, if Germany thinks Trump is going to become this authoritarian, going to China, they're also authoritarian, right? So if you're Europe, you probably just gotta find the remaining American allies and say, let's be a bloc together. I don't know what you do if you're Europe. And no one's ever really thought about a world without the United States. It used to exist, and Great Britain ran everything, and it was awful, and everyone hated everything. So anyways, but we're going to wrap up here, I believe, unless you have any final remarks here, Preston Stewart.
No, sir. Say hi to the NATO people for me. If you get any big interviews, I'm excited to see those come across social media.
Yes. I will let you all know. Next week, folks, I will be at NATO. I know some of our listeners are from NATO, and so if you see me, say hi. And, this won't be my first time in the NATO. I've been in the NATO HQ a few times now. It's a wonderful building. It's made of glass, and it's a cool experience, and I'm always grateful for the opportunities I have with NATO. And people make the mistake of thinking that, and I'm sure you deal with this as well, that when you do stuff with NATO or the U.S. State Department, it's because you're being paid. And I cannot emphasize enough that we are not paid. I only go to NATO because I fundamentally agree with it, right? I'm a big transatlantist. I'm all about the Western Alliance and the free world. I go there because I believe in it, not because I'm being paid. And even if they could pay me, they couldn't pay me enough. So, anyways, we're going to wrap it up. Subscribe, comment, like, and give us 5 stars. And tell us who your favorite country in NATO is, and you can't say your own country. That's going to be the rule. You can't say your own country, because I know a lot of our listeners are from the United States, and it's just like, the United States is my favorite. That's not fair. Give us your favorite NATO country that is not your own, and we will see you all next week. Maybe we'll have a transcontinental episode. That's never been done before. No one's ever done a podcast before on 2 different continents at once, so we're probably going to be invited to the White House. Speaking of the White House, last week and the week after that and the week after that, we said President Trump would come on. But this time he was coming on, and we didn't like the whole invasion of Gaza, so we told him maybe next week. So look forward to that, and we will see you all later.